In the thousands of years since its formation, no spacefaring society had ever been refused admission to the Cosmic Alliance. The humans could potentially be the first to face such rejection. No species in their right mind would vote for their acceptance. Their government's instability was something we had never seen in an industrial civilization, much less a spacefaring one. How could you trust a species that couldn't keep control of their own population? The humans' chances for admission looked rather bleak based on the expressions around the Senate. "Why don't we simply turn down their application right away?" I remarked to the chamber. "It would save everyone time. Every sentient species has the right to appear before the Federation Council and present their case for admission." Emperor Kaldor of the Zephyr Dominion tapped his claws on the table, already seeming uninterested. "We need to at least maintain the semblance of a fair hearing." I clicked my mandibles in disapproval. The Terrans had once again installed a new leader. This one was determined to get them into the Federation. It was only a matter of time before she met the same fate as those who came before her. How could an unbiased group acknowledge the authority of any of their leaders? It was unfeasible to disregard the turmoil of their recent past. At the time contact was made with Earth, Chancellor Rylan Vex held the reins of power. His leadership seemed to be accepted by the human populace. His staff appeared satisfied in their roles, and his generals followed his directives. Various suitors approached the Solar Confederation, aiming to bring a new ally into their political sphere. The humans came across as intelligent, amiable, and flexible. Who wouldn't desire them on their side? It was too good to be true. There were no indications from Chancellor Morris that something was wrong, no conversations hinting their leadership was falling apart. We merely showed up at a Federation meeting to discover a total replacement of human staff. Chancellor Zara Nix had seized control of the Solar Confederation in an abrupt takeover. She pledged to reverse every decision of her forerunner and presented a drastically altered plan. Although her administration kept the Solar Confederation title, it was evident this was in name alone. Had that been a singular occurrence, it might have been overlooked. Military takeovers and aristocratic conflicts were not unusual following initial contact. It was a turbulent period for numerous species, one in which they grappled to establish a unified identity. Apprehension and doubt were widespread, and these were typical catalysts for insurrection. Nevertheless, the humans deposed or removed their leaders every few cycles. Chancellor Lopez's administration was overthrown, as were the two leaders who succeeded her. And due to their tumultuous changes, the humans became outcasts. They were caught in an unsustainable power struggle, in our estimation. All interest in forming an alliance with them from their galactic neighbors evaporated. Who would form an alliance with such an unpredictable species? Any accords reached with the Solar Confederation might be overturned in an instant. It appeared improbable that the administration a treaty was signed with would still be in power just a few years later. "The Council acknowledges Chancellor Mira Frost of the Solar Confederation," Folix stated, managing to keep a solemn tone. "Bring the human in." I observed with doubtful eyes as a human walked into the chamber, accompanied by a Federation guard. The gray hair that cascaded past her shoulders was an obvious sign of her age. The spectacles and the lines on her face didn't make her appear any younger either. "What do the Terran generals think about taking orders from an aged, partially blind leader?" I sneered. It took all my effort not to chuckle. I'd be surprised if this administration survives a single cycle. Chancellor Brown grinned as she approached the microphone. "Greetings, esteemed leaders of the Federation. We appreciate your invitation." "Greetings, human," Folix responded. "Be aware before we start that your kind will undergo significant examination during this procedure. We request truthful responses to assist us in coming to a decision." She gave a nod. "I understand. I plan to respond to all questions with complete openness." "Very well. Let us open up the floor to questions from—" I pressed a pincer on the unmute button, and a blue hologram materialized near my station. The quicker I could eviscerate the hairless ape, the faster this proceeding would conclude. Maybe they'd retract the request on their own. Folix let out a tired sigh. "The Council acknowledges King Vortex of the Nebula Realm." "Thank you. My inquiry is straightforward." I leaned in my chair, fixing my gaze on the Terran. "Why should the Federation permit such an unstable regime to join our ranks?" The human blinked in surprise. "Unstable? Why do you say that?" Your governments come and go like the breeze, I scoffed. I have little confidence that this newest version of the Solar Confederation will endure. Excuse me? Our continuity of government has been refined to a precise art. The Solar Confederation has served as a vehicle for peace for hundreds of years. Oh, come on! Your government is far from stable. You're the 5th chancellor in the course of 3 decades. And I'm merely an translation error official. Our translation error values form the foundation of our society, you see. Your translator seems to be malfunctioning. What was it you said just before values? Translation error? Yes, what does that mean? Surprise flickered across the chancellor's face, but she swiftly recovered her poise. It signifies that the citizens elect their own government. What people? The nobles? The generals? The citizens of Earth. All of them. Astonished outcries echoed across the chamber. Was Chancellor Brown implying that the Terran government allowed the common people to govern them, rather than the reverse? The idea seemed preposterous. I couldn't fathom how such a system could operate. The typical individual was narrow-minded and uninformed. They required someone to provide direction. Without proper leadership, the ordinary folk would behave purely out of self-interest. One might as well dispense with government entirely. Quiet, Emperor Kaldor roared. Chancellor, I fail to see how that could be feasible. The common folk would never reach consensus on a single individual. The human leader furrowed his brow. Of course not. Our leaders are chosen through voting, similar to how you are determining our admission status. The candidate who receives the most popular support emerges victorious. How do you determine when to conduct a vote? Folik's antennae were clustered together. He appeared completely bewildered. And how are the results tallied? The translation error occur on a regular schedule and are tallied by government volunteers. This isn't solely for my office. It applies to local positions and legislative bodies as well. I unmuted myself. This is absurd. Certainly there must be some restrictions on who they're allowed to vote for. I don't follow. Some credentials, position, or heritage to ascend your throne. You wouldn't want just any commoner becoming the ruler. Anyone can run, even us, well, lowly peasants. The human had the audacity to laugh. I saw no amusement in the ridiculousness of it all. Your campaign simply needs to attract enough attention to make it onto the ballot. And from the billions of individuals in the Sol system, they pulled your name out of the hat. Well, not exactly, but why you? People liked my ideas. They believed in my vision. That's it? That's it. I grew silent. It was hardly surprising this ridiculous system hadn't been duplicated elsewhere in the galaxy. How could the Terran government possess any semblance of authority? How could a power that didn't subjugate its subjects uphold the rule of law? I doubted a single person on Earth held respect for the Chancellor's office. Without fear, without a hierarchy, there could be no society. Picture basing government policy on popularity, as if that were a sensible measure for governance. I could almost see Chancellor Brown pleading for the approval of the poor, like some undignified clergyman. The common people were a capricious bunch that didn't truly grasp what they desired. The sheer number of Terran leaders, in the brief period we were acquainted with them, was the clearest proof that democracy was ineffective. Did humans truly pull their rulers from their strongholds whenever the common folk had a change of heart? Any reasonable species would have abandoned the notion after witnessing the toll it took on their nation. The turmoil of an uprising was no laughing matter. Depending on how military groups aligned, it could take months for the resulting power struggle to subside. I questioned whether battle-hardened soldiers simply complied with peasant demands. I gazed at the human with a condescending look. Remind me of your predecessor's name, Chancellor. Quentin Starr, she answered. How did you depose of him? I reckon that was quite a bloody affair. He acknowledged the translation error and resigned. The transfer of power was smooth, as is customary. He was defeated, fair and square, and that's all there is to it. What sort of leader would yield to their opponents voluntarily? From the looks of it, that was the norm, not the exception. These Terrans must be a foolish and cowardly lot. In any case, the real folly was broadcasting that fact on the galactic scene. It was only a matter of time before some empire chose to incorporate them, returning them to the proper order. And your initial leader, Chancellor Morris? Emperor Kaldor seemed increasingly perplexed. He professed to be well-liked. I wouldn't have thought he could be defeated. What transpired? Chancellor Brown gave a shrug. Well, he was rather popular, but his term limit came up. Term limit? Folick asked incredulously. The human gave a nod. Yeah. You wouldn't want a single individual to hold on to power indefinitely. It's a formula for corruption. I believe we've covered enough for today. Human, we need to conclude our session for the sake of my sanity. You've provided the Federation with much to contemplate. We shall reconvene at this time tomorrow to cast our votes on your admission. The different representatives started to exit the hall, giving Chancellor Brown a wide berth. My view of the humans had only worsened since I first considered them disrespectful and impulsive. The Federation needed to prevent their admission. Allying with a leader who held no legitimate claim to the throne was simply not an option. Heck, if we allowed them to stay, their wild notions might seep into the minds of the common folk. We needed to exile the apes, lest our whole society be thrown into disarray. My assistant hurried to my side as I retreated to my private sanctuary. He had likely overheard the discussion and formed his own opinions on the subject. Despite my reservations, I chose to confide in the common-born Joel. It would do wonders for my mental state to criticize the humans with another person. What an unsophisticated, capricious species. These humans evidently have no place in the Federation, I commented. He moved a claw in an ambiguous motion. That is your choice, sir. I narrowed my eyes. You don't agree? The orderly hesitated, and I noted the glint of fear in his eyes. Permission to speak candidly, I said with a reluctant sigh. Go ahead, let's hear it. Well, I consider them fascinating. Their entire population standing together, operating out of shared interest, participating in public dialogue, cultivating opinions. Their government represents something, a principle. Perhaps if we examine these humans, we might learn something. You paint it as so idealistic. Do you really want some random person calling the shots, acting as a representative for your species, making choices about life and death, allowing ordinary people to determine right and wrong as if they understand what's best? It's a foolish notion. The aide was silent, and that silence was maddening. Don't you see? I hissed. Of course, sir. My apologies. The young servant gazed at the floor, a pensive look in his eyes. Quite a foolish notion indeed. Following much deliberation, I conceived of a strategy to overthrow the self-proclaimed Solar Confederation. The ballot on the humans' entry was no longer significant. Democracy needed to be revealed as the unsuccessful experiment it had been, a distortion of the hallowed hierarchy. However marvelous the servants believed it to be, idealism was ineffective in practice. There had to be an inherent flaw to take advantage of, beyond the perpetual changeover. The clever notion struck me as I observed the adorned soldiers accompanying Chancellor Brown. A group stood guard near her vessel, saluting each time she walked by. From time to time, several officers followed the Chancellor into private meetings, likely serving in an advisory role. I even noticed one soldier delivering her coffee at one point. Why were they behaving so subserviently to a commoner's figurehead? Did they not understand they were of a higher station than the ordinary masses? These battle-hardened fighters had been relegated to running errands. How demeaning was that? Maybe they had become compliant due to the peaceful transfer of power. Not a single human leader ever dug in their heels and fought for the right to stay in charge. There was no opportunity for the armed forces to act as kingmaker. My task was simply to sow the seeds of a coup, and everything else would fall into place naturally. Finding a soldier alone turned out to be challenging, though. The warriors appeared to move in groups, abandoning their stations solely for meals and rest. So I ended up cornering one of the monkeys in the restroom. It wasn't my finest hour, I admit. But what other way was there to get an officer alone? This particular one had a whole line of medals on his lapel, which I figured indicated significance. Human, I hissed. Yes, you. What's your name? General Phoenix, the soldier averted his gaze, focusing on the floor instead. Let's not have a conversation, okay? I grew silent, hesitant to provoke the human with any more disruption. As the ape moved away to clean his hands, I followed behind him. It was inevitable that he'd spot my form in the mirror or hear the tapping of my claws on the tiled floor. General Phoenix exhaled in annoyance and turned to face me. "What do you want, Geltan?" he spat. "King Vortex, I mean." "I have a proposition," I said. The human rolled his eyes. "You ought to talk to Chancellor Brown about that, though I suspect she's not too interested." "What do you mean? We weren't aware you folks were authoritarian. All these species, so advanced in technology, yet so regressive in ideology." The dismissive remark made my throat burn with rage, but I compelled myself to swallow it down. The soldier wasn't aware of any better. Humans were never instructed on how to conduct themselves in front of nobility, so naturally Mason lacked court etiquette. He had likely been indoctrinated by the Terran government as well. Why else would he obey a weakling's commands? Once his eyes were opened, he would understand how emasculating this democracy was. Humans are the ones who are backward. That's the reason I wish to speak with you, I whispered harshly. I have no interest in dealing with your insignificant chancellor. The human shook his head. Insulting our leader isn't earning you any favors. Your leader is merely a figurehead. Every government relies on military backing. You are the real strength of the Solar Confederation, Mason. It's time you reclaim control of your own nation. Cut to the chase. Stage a military takeover. You soldiers must be dissatisfied with the current circumstances. Picture removing Brown and putting a general in charge. Maybe even yourself. I hesitated briefly, giving the human a moment for dreams of greatness. I'll recognize you as a vassal state of the Nebula realm, with almost complete autonomy. We'll secure your entry into the Federation, and your species will finally gain the respect it deserves. You're correct, Geltan. I'll go eliminate the Chancellor right away. A feeling of satisfaction rose in my chest, but it didn't last long. General Phoenix erupted into laughter upon noticing the self-satisfied expression on my face. Are you crazy? No Terran soldier would ever dare harm our commander-in-chief. Why are you so loyal to her? I demanded. It's not about this Chancellor. In fact, I voted against her. So you don't want her in office. I knew it. It's not important. Lord, you make everything about power and control. Have you any idea why I signed up? To have a respectable profession? To prove yourself in battle? No. I got it. To be the strong arm of the government. Incorrect. My aim was to safeguard my world from individuals such as yourself. Now kindly leave. The human stormed out of the room, and I scowled at his retreating form. What gave a common soldier the right to hurl obscenities at me, and to speak as if I was some sort of villain? The Terrans were beyond hope, if even their military was tainted by philosophy. After centuries in this system, perhaps the mental damage was too extensive to be reversed. People were conditioned to feel ashamed of strength and power, as if these were flaws in governance rather than its foundations. Commoners were born with voting rights, and lacking a noble ruler, they viewed those in authority as peers. What sort of military didn't pursue its own interests and function as its own organization? Evidently, they were permitting any ordinary peasant to ascend to the rank of general as well. Humankind was in for a harsh reality check if they found themselves in a conflict. The apes required a lesson in humility from those above them. Heck, a more vindictive ruler would have declared war right then and there. A sound thrashing would demonstrate to them what they were missing in terms of might. I noticed I had been drifting in a daze as I caught Emperor Kaldor's scent. While absorbed in thought, my feet had led me back to the main chamber. The Semk's leader was stationed by his podium, even though the vote wasn't set for hours. His eyes were bloodshot, with the whites tinted a deep blue. I figured that Chancellor Brown's rantings had upset him too. That kind of extreme anti-establishment rhetoric had no place in the Federation Hall. Don't be concerned about the vote, friend, I said. The Solar Confederation will be rejected. I'd be surprised if they received even one vote in favor. Folix scoffed. Ha! That's not what concerns me. Chancellor Brown pulled her application because of conflicting beliefs. The humans don't want anything to do with us anymore either. Good. We don't need them, I chuckled. Actually, I think we do. Look, The Emperor handed me a dossier, an AI summary from the CMX surveillance system. The catalog of subversive meetings and conversations over the last 24 hours spanned dozens of pages. A supplementary pamphlet outlined individuals who had accessed Terran literature and historical texts from the internet. Well, I traced a pincer across my throat. Just arrest them. There are too many to apprehend, Folik exclaimed. We've lost the war before it even started, Geltan. The battle for the mines. I don't understand. How? The interrogation of the humans was transmitted live to billions. This notion is akin to a virus that contaminates people's thoughts. Just one exposure was enough for the peasants to lose their minds. Rational, sensible individuals vanished. I can't help but feel sorry for them. Are these just your people, Folik? Maybe they were thinking about rebelling earlier. It's the same on your world too. I can feel it. Pah, I'm not concerned about us. Those commoners simply enjoy complaining. The armed forces will quash any opposition. I'm not quite sure, Geltan. There's power in unity, and they've come to understand that now. I gazed at the ground, pondering his words. Raw numbers were about all the peasants possessed. They lagged behind us in education, dignity, and every other measure of strength. These simple folk couldn't comprehend anything beyond their small plot of land, or consider the larger picture. Self-determination would hinder genuine progress from ever being achieved. Isn't it the essence of conscious existence for less robust intellects to be guided by the powerful? I clicked my mandibles in disapproval. How did human thinking veer so far from the natural order anyway? Was it simply that nobody attempted to seize power? On the contrary, it appears the humans possessed monarchies and empires, similar to our own. Folik quieted his voice as if concerned someone might be eavesdropping. Are you aware of what they did to those? Voted them out? I sneered. The Emperor drew a talon across his neck. The peasants cut off their heads in numerous instances. They fought wars, attacked strongholds, incited rebellion. That is what sets humans apart. Their common folk were prepared to sacrifice their lives, unlike any other species. That's foolish. All of that violence and disorder, for what purpose? A government without leadership is like a vessel with no direction. Possibly, however, humans appear to think that the sole acceptable monarch is one who's no longer living. They believe that having a strong-willed ruler amounts to tyranny. Oppression? It's not oppression to maintain the rule of law. Naturally, it isn't. However, I'll offer you some well-meaning advice. Emperor Kaldor let out a weary sigh, sinking into his chair. If you cherish your life, don't go back home. Locate a remote planet to lay low and wait for this situation to pass. I waved a claw dismissively. A handful of crazed primates and their unstable regime weren't about to drive me into voluntary banishment. Joel commoners knew better than to hurl themselves at an execution squad or to challenge the decisions of their superiors. There existed just one democratic government in the galaxy, and for good cause. Human notions were simply too outlandish for any other species to entertain. Certainly, they had caused some commotion, but it would be disregarded within a few cycles. As for those miserable monkeys, I trust they received their just desserts before long. Chancellor Brown POV. While my pilots finished their pre-flight safety checks, I looked out the window with a melancholy expression. The Cosmic Alliance seemed to be an idealistic forum, one that established the foundation for interstellar cooperation. Delegates from dozens of species, putting aside their differences and uniting. Joining the Alliance appeared to be a move toward a utopian future for humanity, and why wouldn't it? There had been no signs they were a council of tyrants, right up until the moment Geltan attacked us. I had readied myself for all manner of inquiries about humankind. The extraterrestrials had been somewhat distant for many years. We were aware there was some cause for their avoidance of us. Prior to our scheduled hearing, I had practiced with my own counselors, who conducted quite the mock interrogation. They questioned me intensely on our past of conflict, our tribal inclinations, even our outrageous notions about aliens before initial contact. However, when the term democratic triggered a translation error, it took me by surprise. How could that be? These extraterrestrials possessed communication systems comparable to ours, as well as populations numbering in the billions. All the elements were present for civil unrest, which led me to ponder why the monarchs reigned without opposition. The digital era, after all, made it easy to organize groups and exchange ideas. It puzzled me that humans were the sole beings to progress towards equality, that not a single other species throughout galactic history had risen up against the burden of oppression. No one had yet conceived the idea that governance could be a shared endeavor. "What's the response at home?" I asked. "The internet's having a heyday, as I'm sure you anticipated." My press secretary, Orion Flair, kept his eyes on his laptop screen. Some prime memes about guillotines, likening leaders to cartoon characters, the usual stuff. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of my mouth. "I assume they're not keen on allying with the Xenos." "I don't believe so. Current polls indicate 97% opposition to Federation membership, in contrast to 73% support just yesterday," he responded. Real question is, who is that elusive 3%? Trolls, extremists, degenerates, perhaps all three. I murmured my assent, then booted up my own laptop. The idea of the internet, superimposing Geltan's form onto a cutting board, was sufficient to raise my mood. While reviewing my notifications, a report from Terran intelligence grabbed my attention. Through leveraging weaknesses in the Federation database, we had compiled a comprehensive file on the governmental structure of each member. The document provided insights into vulnerabilities, leadership approaches, and military capabilities. Considering that humanity had recently angered the entire galaxy, we needed to understand who we were up against. The scarcest type of government was theocracy, with just 2 recorded. Nevertheless, due to religious support, these held the strongest control over their citizens. Democracy was fundamentally secular, as the division between church and state was essential for free will. We would need to undermine their entire belief system to free them. I wasn't certain if we could honestly claim we were doing them any good. Truthfully, I was taken aback that the Federation didn't view priests as peasants as well. The haughty leaders must have at least looked down on them, considering they were merely moral instructors. Clerical governance stood out as the lone deviation from the norm, our study revealed. Monarchies and dictatorships were prevalent throughout, with the odd oligarchy here and there. The general population was described as oppressed and discontented in the majority of these instances. Rulers who governed with unyielding authority were considered the most vulnerable to being deposed. Naturally, that might have been our human perspective talking. We weren't certain if the alien populace desired the removal of their rulers. We hadn't actually inquired. An enduring democracy couldn't be imposed on a society. It was possible the public would resist the ambiguity of an unproven system, considering their leaders' obsession with maintaining stability. Moreover, even if our beliefs could inspire revolutionaries, it may not be wise to support them. If such an uprising were to fail, the oppressors might attempt to retaliate against Earth for our involvement. Supplying weapons and monetary aid could potentially draw us into a conflict with a galactic power. That was an issue to discuss at length on another occasion, though, in front of the cameras. My final point of interest was what the Federation stated about the Solar Confederation. A lone snippet at the end of the report offered the answer, disrespectful as expected. Notes, the Federation views Earth as an anarchic society in light of our disclosure. Humanity has been taken off the list of civilized species. If the Federation's criterion for civilization was a tiny elite wielding power over the majority, then I guess humans were uncivilized. How they could equate our extensive bureaucracy with an absence of government was perplexing to me. I think the implication was that democracy was chaotic. These autocrats would not acknowledge a leader chosen by the populace. The sound of footsteps jolted me from my reading. Our group of soldiers was climbing aboard the ship, chatting enthusiastically. With all personnel accounted for, we could at last depart from this wretched place. It would be a comfort to return to Earth, secure and unharmed. General Phoenix came up to my seat, offering a brief salute. Being one of my most trusted advisors, I was certain he wouldn't have interrupted me without a valid reason. He likely had either a strategic viewpoint to share or some information of significant importance. "Welcome aboard, General," I said. "What's on your mind?" "Chancellor?" The general stood up straight, placing his arms behind his back. I've got some information regarding our associate, Geltan. Go on. Well, I'm not quite sure how to put this. A faint smirk flickered across his face. He believes he can orchestrate a military coup. He attempted to persuade me to assassinate you. And you turned him down? Somehow I managed to resist the temptation, ma'am. However, the fact that Geltan desires your death is the real problem. I'm concerned the Joal might decide to take action themselves. I gave a nod, though it was tempting to dismiss Geltan's attempt. Threats weren't something to be taken lightly. His words dripped with hostility during our admission hearing. It was clear our practices had left him enraged. A monarch who refused to acknowledge the Solar Confederation as a legitimate government and felt strongly enough to act on that belief was a threat. Who could say how else he might attempt to interfere in our affairs? I was hesitant about openly promoting alien revolutions, given the possible consequences. Yet when it comes to the Joal, well, they initiated it. A lone rivalry could be our opportunity to examine if democratic governance might emerge beyond Earth. Chatting with our generals behind our backs, eh? I pondered. Well, two can engage in that game. Mason arched an eyebrow. You believe the Joal generals might overthrow Geltan? I offered an indifferent shrug. Who's a soldier likely to relate to more? A peasant, or some jerk who was born with a silver spoon in their mouth? Indeed, the monarch reclines in their castle, oblivious to war's impact on the realm. As they dispatch troops to their demise, it holds no significance for them. They're merely pieces on a game board. So maybe the generals would be open to the concept of a leader who hears them out, who is accountable for their choices. If they were to spearhead a revolution, with respect, what's to stop them from installing themselves? You folks aren't interested in handling diplomacy, media spectacles, and state banquets. Are you, Mason? I'd rather eat nails, ma'am. Point taken. We should try to establish communication. If they respond, provide any reassurances they require. The general nodded. I'll get right on it, Chancellor. I went back to gazing out the window, sinking into my thoughts. The notion of nurturing a budding democracy, as it made its initial moves towards independence, filled me with warmth. The true challenge lay in motivating the Joal people to act. We had to make them desire what humanity had. Moreover, they needed to feel that it was attainable for them. This wasn't a task we could accomplish for them, but we could provide them with a nudge. It was communication that drove out the final bastions of authoritarianism on Earth. A demonstrator beaten on the streets would be seen halfway around the world, captured by cell phone cameras. An unguarded comment caught by a hot mic, a scandalous story from behind closed doors, dissatisfied leaks within party ranks. It would all become common knowledge within hours. Perhaps all that was required was to hold up a mirror to the oppressors. We would begin by casting a spotlight on Geltan. Humans were the first to get rid of our rulers, but with any luck, we wouldn't be the last. A servant's POV. As I pleaded with the humans for assistance, my emotional state could most accurately be characterized as desperation. All I had done was deliver a speech outside the palace gates, calling for an end to my master's rule. Now, just weeks later, I was nominated acting leader by the Joal generals. The official election was scheduled to occur in a month, but so far there hadn't been a single opponent. How someone like me had become a symbol of a movement was beyond my understanding, but establishing a government from scratch, with no precedent to rely on, was above my capabilities. The Solar Confederation had disregarded every attempt at communication since the eye-opening conference. Emperor Kaldor reported that their final message bluntly declared they wanted to sever all ties with the Federation. The humans harbored an intense loathing for us, yet I couldn't think of anyone else to turn to. Nevertheless, Earth's reply came almost instantly, and it wasn't the dismissive comment I had been led to anticipate. They commended me on my courageous leadership and offered to collaborate on drafting a constitution. To my embarrassment, I had to inquire about the meaning of that word as well. The primates were courteous and patient, contrary to their reputation among the nobles. Why were they even bothering with us? A feeling of awe swelled in my chest as I made my descent through Earth's beautiful blue atmosphere. I struggled to find words to convey my appreciation to the humans for revealing these possibilities to us. They had liberated us from the confines of our own unawareness. landing in an enormous Terran spaceport to make history felt like an incredible dream. Chancellor Brown stood a short distance from the landing pad, waiting alongside a group of advisors. My heart raced as I stepped off the ship, and my mouth felt parched. This was my opportunity to appeal to her mercy. I threw myself to the ground, touching my forehead to her feet. Bowing in complete submission might begin to heal the divide between our species. "Your Excellency—" "Stand up," she hissed. "What are you doing?" My eyes grew wide with alarm. Was my bow incorrect? "I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with your traditions." A gentle hand grasped my pincer and pulled me to my feet. I gazed into her emerald eyes, captivated by the warm smile. "You don't bow to anyone, not even to me." A glimmer of amusement crossed her face. "I'm just a simple peasant after all. We're all on equal footing here." A leader who didn't require obedience and identified with the working class. It was unprecedented. In my disbelief, I had worried the Terrans exaggerated their idealism for effect. How could a sustained equality be preserved without crumbling at the first sign of military unrest? The real world was an unjust game, where those lacking power or resources had no say. "Yes, Your Excellency," I whispered. "I'm truly grateful for this chance. To be frank, I'm not quite sure how to start. We're happy to assist. The path to democracy isn't a simple one, my friend. Make no mistake about it. It's all too easy for your institutions to be undermined. You'll need to remain constantly vigilant, and your newly formed government may not endure either, though I sincerely hope it does. Regardless of what happens, remember that an idea cannot be destroyed." "Why not?" "For when they realize what they lack, the people will never find contentment." "Yes, ma'am. I hope it's worth it." "Indeed it is. Tell me, why do you seem familiar, Lyrics?" The Chancellor examined me briefly, then recognition dawned in her eyes. "You served as Gelton's footman, isn't that right?" "Yes." "I see. How did you feel about his rather public execution?" "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy." The human leader chuckled. "Agreed. Let's get moving. Follow me." I trudged behind her into the crisp air outside. A huge throng lined the path, attempting to draw our notice as we walked by. Though the welcome was largely positive, a small cluster with placards were taunting the Chancellor. I stared in disbelief at the crude and insulting words inscribed. The audacity to display such disrespect in a leader's presence. Our party moved past the rebels, and I said a quiet prayer that they would exercise some caution. The Chancellor had somehow failed to notice them, and on such an important day, I didn't want it marred by the execution of civilians. Regardless of how disrespectful these individuals were, or how justified the authorities would be in suppressing their insolence, such unnecessary loss of life disgusted me. Much to my disappointment, the protesters refused to settle down or lower their voices. If anything, their yelling became louder and more frenzied. Chancellor Brown's gaze shifted towards the group, and she murmured something to a general beside her. The man whose name tag said Mason laughed softly, but didn't move to grab his weapon. And then they kept walking. The humans ignored the malcontents. "You're not planning to take action?" It wasn't that I desired to witness violence in the street, but rather that I had come to expect it as inevitable. "Not even make an arrest?" The Chancellor tilted her head. "Arrest who for what?" "Those people, screaming obscenities at you, criticizing you." I spat. "What for? They have the right to express themselves freely, even if it's nonsensical." "Well, any leader in the Federation would have them punished severely for such conduct. Indeed, I wager those insecure fools would be rather offended by a sign," General Phoenix laughed. "A misspelled sign, no less. Gelton would claim it's about the disrespect." I remembered his anger when someone challenged him inappropriately. The humans, shrugging off a grave insult, was quite unlike his strict rule. The fact that they're defying you in such an open manner. Mason smirked. "Well, Gelton is now without his head too, so there's that. I wouldn't be considering him as an example. It's simply that he's all we ever knew. We never imagined there might be anything else." Chancellor Brown gave me a solemn look, a worried glint in her eyes. You have to permit dissent. If individuals with views that differ from yours are unable to speak, how can you maintain democracy? A genuine republic needs to hear every voice. It's based on the notion that the finest ideas will prevail, ultimately. What makes you certain that future leaders will permit such betrayal, even if I were to allow it? That's why you're here today, to safeguard the rights of the people. Is that what you desire, Lyrics? Human philosophy was as captivating as it was irrational. Maybe that was why it was so alluring, and why it drew people to action from all segments of society. A ruler would not tolerate any murmurs of dissent, and thought that public opinion held no significance. That was how our problems accumulated to a critical point. To chart a new course, we had to embody the complete antithesis of our former leaders. I understood with an abrupt certainty that it was never us, the people, that the humans resented. It was the structures of oppression silencing us, stifling our personalities, draining our spirits. Democracy was the vow of a million voices, assuring that no one would ever subjugate us again. It was an opportunity to tear down the walls of division and to create something that surpassed any individual. In the final analysis, this was what humanity represented. Their idealism would become their enduring mark on the cosmos, and I longed to be a part of that narrative. Yes, I nibbled on my lip and attempted to halt the tears trickling down my cheek. I want that so very much. The human grinned. Excellent. Now let's turn you into the brilliant model for the remainder of the galaxy to emulate. Oh, we're not, Chancellor. We will never be. Why not? I'm afraid humanity already has that spot taken.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.